Right, so welcome back after a nice lunch session there. I will hand it over to Kedar now to begin the proceedings. We'll probably have another 5-minute stretch break at the hour. Okay, so Kedar, all over to you.
Okay, wonderful. Hi, can everyone hear me? Good? All right, perfect. Okay, so hope everyone enjoyed their lunch. I think I ate a bit too much, so I may be speaking a little slower now. But, okay, so let's get started. So in this case, the EW system folks, they ran 18 tests generated by an orthogonal array. At the same time, they ran the 100 tests that the government was demanding. And one of the findings they found when they ran it for 2 cycles is every unique defect found by the 100 tests was found by the 18. So they had confidence to say that during our regressions, let's just run these 18. Now their testing time went from 2 days to 4 hours. So they had much more time for development. They could do 75% reduction in testing. But there's something else that orthogonal arrays provide here. And that's defect analysis. Because one of the challenges we face is, hey, once we run the tests, we get data. And this may be continuous data. Maybe we're doing performance testing. We get a response time. We may get pass-fail data. We get many different types of data. In this case, they were actually counting number of defects. Because if there were multiple defects in this test scenario in the algorithms that they were seeing, they would count them. And you have to make decisions once you get an output and say, okay, what should I tell the developers to resolve this issue? And that's a challenging question. In this case, we're dealing with 6 parameters. How do you, with many different levels, how can you drill down to what parameters are driving the failures? The way an orthogonal array is planned, this actually becomes very straightforward. So for example, let's say you want to know the effect of high frequency. And this is only possible because orthogonal arrays are balanced across all factors. You just take the cases where high frequency, so test cases 1, 2, 3, 10, 11, 12, you look at the defects, and you average them. So you just take 1, 2, 3, 10, 11, 12, take the response for defects for those cases and average them. And you're assured that you're testing against all other parameters. So that's the effect of high frequency. That's all you have to do. It's very simple. Mid-frequency, again, you take the response for test 4, 5, 6, and test 13, 14, 15, and you average it. Sum them up and average it. For low, likewise, and you can do this for every single parameter. And you have confidence, because they're balanced, that these are trustworthy results. Anybody who's familiar with the design of experiments, these are resolution 3 designs. Orthogonal arrays are resolution 3 designs, which means all main effects are estimable. That means you get real effects out of this data analysis, and it's such a simple data analysis. So as opposed to having to now send this information back to developers who then have to run many additional test cases, you can now feed them with great information. In this case, you can give them a graph. And this is just the data of the averaging data, and we just charted it. The average defect per test case was 1.72. And now we're looking at what factors are driving the average to go up. That's where the developers have to address. So in this case, it's low power, E3, drove failures the highest. So immediately you can feed them, say, hey, go fix E3. Similarly, C3, send defects the highest. Similarly, B1, send things the highest. Done. In addition, you can also isolate interoperability, multiple combinations coming together. And you can get a prioritized list of potential interoperability defects, which is how many multiple parameters coming together. And now you have a short list to investigate for these as well. So you can give a risk table. You talk about project management. You can give a risk table back to your managers or to your team and say, these are the risk areas for our next development cycle. So just to review, because I think this is a really important point. Because orthogonal arrays are balanced, we can do a very simple analysis to determine the effects of individual parameter levels. All we do is take the cases where that factor occurs, that level occurs, and average the response for those. And people usually graph it to kind of look at trend lines and things of that sort. So graphical format, but you could also list it in a tabular format as well. And so this is one advantage. So the team not only got a 75% reduction in cycle time of actual test execution, they also saved in test data analysis. And in this case, they reduced cycle time to, and debugging capability. And there's one more advantage that this team found for using orthogonal arrays. The 100 emitters, the original 100 signals the customer gave them, the government gave them, were comprised of these factors. Now the government had done its own sub-optimization. They knew there was a lot more in the theater, but they said, you know, I know nobody can afford, because the way it works is if you're on a government contract, you tell someone to run 100 tests, government pays for 100 tests. That's it. Nobody puts it in their own pocket. So government sub-optimized. They chose 100 out of the total set. They left out 2 additional parameters, which they said were less important, just for the sake of reducing the test size. This company was a little forward-thinking. They said, you know, in the version 2 of this system, they're going to demand these 2 additional parameters. So they included them in the factor table, and guess what? They fit into the same L18 orthogonal array. So they didn't have to increase the number of tests. Now they were getting more data than even the government wanted, than their customer wanted, and they had a jump start for generation 2. They got data about each of these, what effects each of these factors had on the defects. So one of the really nice things about orthogonal arrays is once your team starts using orthogonal arrays for a systematic test planning process, change of requirements becomes very straightforward. I ask any of you now, let's say a team has developed a test plan, and you tell them, there's 2 additional parameters we need with 3 levels each. How simple a task is that? They're going to say, you know what, it took me 3 months to write the original test scripts. It's going to take me 3 months to write the new ones. That's generally what they say. Or maybe they'll say, you know, we'll keep the original scripts, we'll add a bunch more to the end of it, and say, okay, that's our new set. But it's a significant amount of additional work. So this way, and it's not work that anybody likes to do. Nobody likes to redo their work. So this is a way now that you can eliminate the undesirable work from testing staff, and also greatly improve productivity. I mean, this is done in a matter of seconds. You just add these 2 factors, you get a new test plan. Yeah. Any questions regarding the EW system test? I think the key lessons here are, one is, you can get coverage of much larger test plans because you're selecting very intelligent test points. And one of the ways the team developed confidence in this case was try running them both. Try it for a cycle or 2. I think for them it was experience. They saw the math, they saw the background, but they said, you know, we really want to experience it for ourselves and make sure and have confidence because, hey, this is our jobs on the line. So they tried it out and they got there. Second is, orthogonal arrays make defect analysis significantly easier. So you can easily give a risk table that's comparable and estimable to your development staff and say, these are the high-risk areas, fix them. And there's no additional testing needed to get there. Okay. That's good. All right. The next case study I'm going to go through is actually an interesting case study. It's from the finance industry. This was a very large bank that had very separate finance systems. So they had a separate portal for loan application acceptance. They had a separate portal for underwriting. They had a separate tool, and these were all legacy tools that have been built over several years. They had a separate tool for interfacing with the credit agencies. When you apply for a loan, the banks go to a credit agency to say, hey, does this guy have outstanding debts anywhere else? If he doesn't, then give him the loan. If he does, then hey, maybe charge him a higher rate and those type of things. So that's used in the underwriting process. The next phase was payment processing. So they had a completely separate module for payment processing. They also had a completely separate module for reporting. So both the government reporting of their for taxes reasons as well as internal business reporting to say, okay, here are our financial statements for this year based on our loan performance and so forth. So that was okay. They had a lot of systems, but they started facing a lot of competition. There became a lot of a new slew of online banks that came about that will give you instant quotes, they said. So you just type in your income, you type in your social security number, which is your ID number the government gives you, you type in your birth date, you say where you live, 2 minutes. Loan application approved with a quote. These guys, because they had separate systems, they had to accept the loan, they had to transfer it over to the underwriting had to transfer it over to the credit bureaus, then they actually had another set which was going to the title management to see if that home actually exists. You don't want to give a loan to a non-existent home. It took them 4 or 5 days to get back to the customer. So they started realizing they had to change when customers started leaving. They said the customers would apply for a loan. By the time they accepted them, they'd already accepted another loan. So they were losing customers on a daily basis. So this was a pressing task, and it was hurting their bottom line. And at this point, so what they did was they decided to integrate all these systems. So create an enterprise integration, which would tie together all these legacy systems, upgrade the ones that needed upgrading, and have a full end-to-end integrated data flow. So they could do instantaneous quotes as well as every stage of the processing, from loan acceptance to reporting. That was their objective. At this point, they were working, by the way, with a partially outsourced team, partially in-source team. And they were in beta testing, and they had a significant amount of errors. And it was about 7 months behind schedule and 20% over budget. And it was actually interesting for me because my original background, I worked in finance. And one of the things I knew from finance IT was they never had problems with money. If there was a problem with testing, okay, add a bunch of testers. There's no such thing as being over budget. There's never a question. So I got a call from one of my old colleagues that said, hey, Kedar, can you help me? Because this was around the time of 2008 where they actually started looking at their costs. This was the first time they looked at their costs. I was actually surprised I was getting a call from a bank at all. And he brought apart the problem. I said, this looks like something very interesting. So I decided to work on it with him. So the top level system that they wanted to integrate were the loan application approval, which includes underwriting, payment acceptance management, data storage, and the reporting. And there's a systems architecture. I don't think we need to go into too much detail about this. They had, geographically distributed data centers. They had a lot of, security features. They were interfacing with credit card companies and banks, as well as title management, underwriting. They had web applications for customers to access the data, as well as their, partner brokers. So it was a huge system. And they wanted to, they developed a system integration test. And this is the time when I got involved. They had developed and I'm going to call this business as usual process. That just means the current process they were using. That's all that term means. They could be using orthogonal arrays, they could be using manual testing, they could be using something else. Business as usual is their current status quo process. So they were using a current business as usual process as follows. They'd understand the most likely customer scenarios, and I heard some others here that were doing that as well, which is a really commonly used technique. Understand the most likely customer paths, because there's different ways of applying. You could go online, you could do it by phone, you could go through a broker. I mean, there's many different paths a customer can take. Create several test scenarios for the most likely test cases, and then add scenarios for a couple scenarios here and there for the rest of the less likely scenarios. And then crisis scenarios, for example, 2 data centers crashing, those type of scenarios were included. And there was the OA testing process. And the only, I convinced my friend, I said, the only way I'm getting involved, because I knew how these financial institutions work, I said, the only way I'm getting involved is if you sponsor a parallel team. I said, that's it. You have to sponsor an identical team of equally mature staff to work separately from the original team so we can get a real comparison. So he sponsored a team using OA process. And this was the process they used. Again, understand the requirements domain, which means define your factor table, do a peer review of the test parameters, and generate an OA. So pretty straightforward process. So these were 2 independent teams that were going to execute the same code. And I was really happy they were ready to sponsor an extra team. That's not something that most companies do, but this company was ready to do so. And let me just kind of show you how this team, how their business as usual process worked. So I just took a few of their factors. There's many more. So let's say application. There's several different types of applications. There's online, phone, retail center, mail, or you could go through a partner broker. And I've highlighted in blue the ones that they determined were the most important. Similarly, loan type, credit verification, who's the credit verification authority, and the highlighted in blue are the most likely. So this is how they generated their business as usual cases. And I think many of you will find this familiar because it's a common process used everywhere. So they said, online, so let's make combinations of the most likely. So online, with Jumbo One, with Equifax, with a bank transfer, with a correct amount, with a mailed report, and all online. Say that's one scenario. And they went, and so forth, and they went through. And they came up with, I believe, around 180 or 190 test scenarios, out of, by the way, 186 million. So hey, they did a good job optimizing from that perspective. And they were using pretty senior staff that were very well experienced in this system. So they weren't using like a staff that didn't know what was going on. So they had some confidence. They said, hey, we're going to find a lot of defects if there are any defects. And here were the results. And this is actually real parallel teams. So the business as usual process had 188 tests, and they monitored every stage of the game how much testing effort was there, and which includes, so there was 480 hours, this is man hours, of test planning effort. That's generating the test cases and the test procedures. Then there was test execution effort, which was execution of test cases and data analysis. They were lumped together as test execution. It was lumped together. And when they ran through this, they found 12 unique defects. Using the OA, they ran 81 test cases. Test planning effort reduced to 145. And test execution effort reduced to 890. And they found 12 unique defects. And in fact, they were the same defects. So what did this bank see? No reduction in coverage, significant reduction in staff hours. And anyone in the IT industry knows, what's the cost? The people. This related to about $80,000 in hard savings on their first application. And this was a true side-by-side analysis, and they detected all defects. So this kind of got the teams very interested. And using this case study, we actually got several other financial institutions involved. And in the next module, I'll show you where we ran studies like this at about 10 financial institutions, 20 studies, at insurance companies, at mortgage banks, at investment banks, and several others, capital markets. So that's it. Any questions on this? Go ahead.
So in terms of numbers, it looks like one each both the cases. But what about the severity or?
They were the same cases. In this case, they were the same cases. So it's the same comparison of severity. Now, here's a question for you. Let's say you run 188 test cases, and you find 24 of your cases fail, and that backs into 12 unique defects. And let's say you run 81 test cases, let's say 12 fail, and that relates to 12 unique defects. Is there any difference? You might be finding the failures more than once, but at the end of the day, you're interested in finding these unique defects. And that's what they found. So in the 188, they found the same defect many times in some scripts. Yeah, there could be. There could be an isolated fault that we both missed.
Yeah.
Okay? That was missed by their test plan and missed by the orthogonal test plan.
But OA emphasizes that we could actually find out the isolated faults as well, right? But
When you talk about isolated faults, maybe give an example of what you mean. So let's say, for example, and let's go back to this one.
the first cubicle example you shown, wherein shown the fault region and the
Yeah.
isolated fault.
OA deals with logic faults.
Okay.
That's the area it deals with. That's its primary focus. You could be lucky and find an isolated fault, but that's luck.
Okay.
But I think that's luck with any type of test planning process. Out of 186 million, there's a possibility there's one isolated fault, one unique isolated fault. If you choose 188 based on their testing, what are the chances you're going to find that isolated fault? And we're talking about 0.01% minus 0.015 or something percent. It's like you're comparing two things that are so small it's not relevant. But I agree with you. In both cases, there could be defects out of the scope of both of the. Even, hey, maybe we didn't define our factor table right. That could be a problem also. But in this case, what we're comparing to is what they're doing today. That was our metric we were using. So say, okay, can we do at least as good as they're doing today with less cost? That's a win for them. That means they can reduce cost and not increase risk. So that's what we're saying. Yeah, I completely agree with you. There could be faults that everybody missed, but that's the reality, I guess. Yeah. Did that answer your question? Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Good. You can never say you found every single defect or you got technically 100% coverage unless you run all combinations. I mean, there could be an isolated fault somewhere. But what you can say is, hey, with the budget I have, can I select test points that have the highest likelihood of finding faults? So in this unit, I'm going to discuss, hey, what is the effectiveness and efficiency of OA test plans? And we're going to go through some telecommunications case studies. We're also going to go through some additional finance case studies as well. And then we're going to talk about code coverage. And that's an MRP system. And how to get to 100% code coverage. I know that's a buzzword that's used all the time. Okay. So here's a summary of 2 case studies, and then I'll go into more detail. This was from a star mail regression test at AT&T. Now this is a very old case study. This is actually the first case study ever where orthogonal arrays were implemented for testing. It was done by my father. He had written a book on engineering design methods. And he went to his executive director. And this was more for mechanical design using specialized statistical methods. And he went to his director and said, okay, can you sign off? Because he was using some AT&T Bell Laboratories case studies. So he needed a signature of his boss. And his boss said, you know, your book is about mechanical design. But AT&T at that time was changing. It used to be 75% mechanical and electrical engineers and 25% software. But by the time he'd written that book, it was 75% software, 25% electrical and mechanical. So he said, I'm not going to sign your book until you do something for the 75%. So I mean, granted, my father was pretty mad. But he said, hey, let me take this as a challenge. So he went to this team, the StarMail team, because they were in a crisis scenario and actually helped them and got tremendous results. In this case, you were able to find more defects and more than double the tester productivity. And I'll go through this one in more detail. The second is, how many of you have done software reliability tests? Where you run software for like 500 hours, or like 1,000 hours, or 10,000 hours? Anyone? Yeah, there's one here. Okay. So here's an example where you can use an orthogonal array to significantly reduce the length of a reliability test. And this was another case study at AT&T at the same time. These two were the ones that my father used to get his book published. He showed these to his executive director. He said, okay, fine, you can publish your book. And let me walk through these. And you'll notice by some of the factors that this is a dated case study, but I think the lessons are very valuable. Okay? So we're going to discuss, okay, what's the scope of testing, what the traditional test planning method was, using orthogonal arrays, and what the results were. This was a major upgrade to, at that time, they were using DOS computers and a Unix server. So there were new clients being introduced, new server-type clients being introduced into the network. So they had to do a major upgrade of their email system. So this was a regression test. From a user standpoint, there should have been no change or loss of functionality. But in the back end, there was going to be significant changes in the infrastructure. Okay. And here was the main StarMail server. And here were the types of PC clients that were going to access it. 8086, 8286, 8386, 2 different types of 8386s. And so there were major changes being made. They had different PC versions and new operating systems as well. And here was the kind of summary of where the functionality was previously and where it was going to be in the future. MSNet was supported in the past release. The new release was to encompass this entire box. So different types of clients as well as different additional types of servers on the back end. Okay? They decided that, hey, you know, this is kind of a illegal combination right now. Nobody runs this configuration. So it's not in our test scope. But the rest of these boxes, including the original box, are in the test scope. So there was a significant amount of regression testing that needed to be done. So here was the original test. that was being run. This was considered their exhaustive test. They had experts, system gurus. They ran 450 test cases times the single box. This was their old test. In their old test, they ran 450 test cases for their single box. Now they're going to have to multiply it by 9 because they wanted to run several additional. In fact, you know, the one that was out of scope, they decided to test it anyway because they said, well, they're pretty sure there's going to be an upgrade really soon, and that configuration will be working. Times 2 MS-DOS versions, times 2 StarMail versions, times 3 PC types, 48,600 test cases. It's a tremendous amount of test cases, and for each one you have to set up a test environment. It's very challenging to do. I mean, some of these could be run in simulation, but this was a tremendous effort. So they created an optimization process. They said, we'll test 450 test cases, and they said, let's go down the diagonal matrix, which is a smart idea. So they're getting some tests for each of the different servers, each of the different clients, kind of like a requirements traceability, you can call it. So they're running 450 in each of these boxes, and then they'll run a few random test cases in the rest of the boxes just to make sure they get coverage. And they came out with a budget of 1,500 test cases for 450 times 3, about 1,500, including the random tests. But here was the problem. Development was delayed by 10 weeks. They'd allocated 18 weeks for testing to test these 1,500. And the tester had said, you know, I have plenty of time. I can run these 1,500 test cases in 18 weeks. But development was delayed by 10 weeks. Now, I don't know how your organizations work, but if a development's delayed, testing doesn't get any extra time. There's a deadline, there's a deadline. So they said, no, you have to get it done in 8 weeks. So this tester said, I can't do it alone. Give me some more staff. And he said, even with some more staff, I'm going to have to cut down the number of test cases. So he had to do a very detailed analysis, sub-optimize even, cut down the number of test cases, brought it down to 1,000, and said, add one more tester. So additional cost and more risk. At this point, we decided, hey, why not try orthogonal arrays? And developed 422 test cases using orthogonal arrays. It was actually multiple factor tables, because for each functional group, they created a factor table, which added up to 422 test cases. This 422 would only require one staff in the 8 weeks, so no increase in cost. And at this point, they were desperate. They said, we don't even have money for an extra staffer, no time, go with it. So they went with the orthogonal array test. And by the way, here's just an example of one of the factor tables that was run. This was for a copy move function. I don't think we have to go through it. Yeah. And here were the results. 422 test cases, one staff, 8 weeks. They found 41 unique defects. Okay? So we don't know how many total defects there are in the universe, but we found 41. So this tester was very curious, by the way, because he said, how did you come up with such a short set? I'm sure there's bugs that are outside that set. So he analytically walked through each of these 1,000 and said, how many of these tests would have been triggered? How many of these faults would have been triggered by those test scenarios? And he said, using the shortened test plan, he would have gotten 32. Using the full test plan, he would have gotten 36. So of the universe of these 41, they wouldn't have covered all of them. But there's a natural question. Hey, maybe these 41 is not the total test space anyway. Maybe there's 42, 43, 44 that everybody missed. So what they actually did, email system gets exercised every day, thousands of times in every single organization. They ran the system for a year and a half. And they tracked it for a year and a half. No faults detected in the scope of this test. And I think there's no more exhaustive test than running an email system with 20,000 employees for a year and a half. That's an exhaustive test. They did find 2 defects, by the way, but those were out of scope of this actual test. They dealt with the platform, underlying platform of the Unix system. There were some issues with the Unix operating system and file transfers. So they determined those 2 were out of scope of this test. But what they did learn is, hey, it's important to test your platform too. They should have included platform tests within their tests. So that was a lesson learned for next time. And just to kind of give an example, hey, you got 260% more fault detection increase. You didn't have to increase staff, and you found more defects. So this was one of the really promising case studies. And here's another example. This is a reliability test. And anyone that's studied reliability engineering or software reliability engineering knows that testing takes a ton of time. I mean, weeks, months, you have to keep running a software. In this case, this was a network operation support system. And this is a very poor drawing of the map of New Jersey, the state where I live. Here are the there were 7 key network operation centers in New Jersey. And across the country, I'm just showing you a simplified version. And each of these were the major backbone to the telephone network. These are the ones that forwarded all the packets from the routed all the packets from the different calls. And it was set up as a ring architecture because if any of these went offline, or any of the links went offline, there was another path to go through. So there was a redundancy. And the objective here is to take the shortest path so you connect your telephony calls fastest. And you also change based on broken links. So if a link breaks on the shortest path, hey, you adjust your processes appropriately. And this system had actually been run for 400 hours through a reliability test. And the team had stamped it, said this is good to go. And by the way, this is the main backbone. If this thing goes down, no calls are made. It's a tremendously important system. So it was certified as reliable by standard reliability tests. But they felt it was a risk. Like I said, it was very important. So they decided to run some additional tests, and they thought, hey, we used orthogonal arrays on a different test problem, and it looked promising. This was very early in the stage, by the way. This was before it was a well-used method. This was only the second application. They said, let's try to experiment. Let's take a look at it. So they determined there were 7 key parameters, and they were called the COMC operations, as well as several of the links that could be on or off or broken. And the scope of the testing was ability of each, in this case computer, but this was a major operation system, to go online and offline, and ability to use the shortest path. Those were the key requirements that they wanted to make sure were satisfied. And the state of each of these operating systems were going to be the factors. So COMC on, COMC off for each of these network operations. And also, they wanted to look at 2 of the different links. Because they said they want to test when one link is broken. They want to test when both links are broken. They want to test when 2 things are offline. Because if both links are broken, you actually have a data loss. So they wanted to test all these type of scenarios. And here was their factor table. And what they found was, I skipped a few that were not that necessary. What they found was the process table grew in size as the test progressed. Because you're exercising many things. It's very different than a reliability test when you just say go run and observe. In this case, we were forcibly turning things on and off, deliberately turning things on and off. Now, anybody that has ever used a server knows if process table keeps growing, what's going to happen? You're going to get a crash. And they were able to actually predict, based on each test case, how much it progresses. So they were able to give us very specific reliability prediction in just 12 tests, 4 hours. Because they deliberately turned things on and off. So I think the lesson here is, in your reliability tests, in addition to just letting your system run, I know that's part of the requirements your customer asks for, also look at deliberately changing things in order to exacerbate any issues so they come out, as opposed to just waiting for them to occur. In standard reliability testing, you have to run it for a long time, wait for X number of defects, and then predict a reliability based on that. As opposed to that, you can deliberately cause those defects to occur very quickly and get a prediction of reliability. So what this allowed is they prevented a major system crash. And if you're, here, if the cellular network crashes or the hardline network crashes, it's a national disaster. It's not something you want to happen. Here are 2 cases quickly from the defense and aerospace industry that I thought were interesting. The weapons fire and detection system, by the way, was not a 4-parameter problem. It was a 22-parameter problem with about 33 billion possible scenarios. And these scenarios were, and this was actually a manual test. So you actually had to put soldiers on the ground, planes in the sky, enemies on the field. This was an operational test. Each of these tests is probably $50,000, $100,000 cost per test. So budget was a huge issue. So using Know8, they were able to cut it to 64 tests and cover the whole domain. And this system is actually fielded. So it's a fielded system, and they're not seeing any major failures in this system. There was another command and control system. It's kind of interesting. Nowadays, military commanders like to just sit in front of a computer as opposed to being in the field. But they want to know everything going on as if they are in the field. So command control system aggregates data from many different sensors, from inputs from humans, inputs from satellites, and shows it on a screen on a web browser. So they could sit there with a tablet computer in a tent and almost feel like they're on the battlefield. It'll show exactly where their soldiers are. So it's a tremendously complicated problem because you're dealing with interfacing with about 20 to 30 legacy data systems, which have their own issues. Plus, you have to aggregate all that data and display it in a common interface. In this case, they were able to reduce the test plan generation time from 24 staff weeks to 1 staff week. So tremendous improvement in schedule. They eliminated 320 interoperability test gaps that were in the original test plan. And they saved over $375,000 in hard cash. That included schedule savings as well as in test cases. Any questions so far? Just want to pause. No? All right, good. And going back to the financial services industry, after we ran the enterprise mortgage application study, there stemmed a lot of interest because they found a way to reduce cost without reducing risk. So we signed on about 10 financial services companies to run side-by-side pilots, the same thing that the original mortgage bank did. And we said you have to provide double teams. One team running your original process, one team using orthogonal array, and you have to let us share the results. That was our goal. We said, we'll participate at no cost. We have no problem doing that, but you have to share these results with us. That was our objective. And here were the key validations that needed to be made. Orthogonal array tests would not increase risk. So they will not find less defects than business as usual. That's a natural case. So if you're reducing the test size or you're changing your process, forget about reducing test size. You may be increasing your test size, as someone mentioned, if the testing is inadequate. The question is, we should never miss defects that we would have found. Otherwise, we were doing better before. Second question, the teams had an impression that orthogonal array testing is complicated. So they said, so they wanted to ensure that orthogonal array testing will not increase their staff effort. So they said, our total test planning time, test execution time should not increase because that's directly related to their cost. Get some water. And by the way, these were run as real side-by-side studies. So we had a business as usual team and an orthogonal array team on every single project. And there were 20 projects. So here was the process they followed. They got a testing task, some kind of a set of requirements or a test scope. It was sent off to the OA team and the business as usual team. And each of them ran test planning steps. Each of them ran test scripting and execution steps. And each of them conducted defect analysis. It's completely separate. And compile and compare results in order to validate those two assumptions. And here's what they found. And let's go through these tables. The first is ratio of number of tests, orthogonal array versus business as usual. The second is ratio of number of defects, orthogonal array versus business as usual. And finally, ratio of test effort. And let's go through the bottom two, and then I'll address the top one. First question was, are we finding all defects? If the ratio is below 1, we missed a defect that business as usual found. In no cases out of all 20 did we miss defects. And in fact, in 8 of the cases, so in 40% of the cases, we found more defects, and sometimes significantly more defects. So this was a huge finding for them. They said, hey, this is something that's really important to us. We're not increasing risk. In fact, we're decreasing risk, which was something new for them. The first mortgage case study that we ran, hey, we kept the risk the same. We found the same number of defects. In this case, they said, hey, there's an opportunity to find even more defects. The next, which was really important to them, was ratio of test effort. And that's really related to their cost. And they found that in most cases, cost was less. In one scenario, cost was more. But in that scenario, we found double the defects. The ratio was 2. So for the additional cost, there was additional return. So what that means is the original test plan was not adequate. It probably was smaller, or they hadn't planned execution time, so it took longer, and it took more effort to execute. And third, and this actually surprisingly was not that interesting to the teams. They didn't care the number of tests. They said, we're interested in cost and risk. But we thought it would be good to take a look at ratio of number of tests as well. And you notice in some cases, tests are larger. It's not always the case that orthogonal reduce test cases. On average, they do reduce test cases, but there are cases when they increase. So for example, test case 1 in the first pilot, the number of test cases almost doubled. But you notice you found significantly more defects. So what that tells us is, okay, yes, we're paying more, but we're getting more for paying more in terms of test cases. Similarly, if you look at the project 3, you had more test cases, and you found more defects. And you can see that as a general trend in most cases. And on average, you do reduce the total number of test cases, but I think what's important to most organizations is not an actual number, but, okay, are we finding all defects, or are we finding the most defects we can find? And also, what is it going to cost me, and how long is it going to take? That's what the team found to be the most important. And if you look at the averages, the total cost reduction was 41% over all these cases, which equated to tens of millions of dollars for these firms. So it's a huge cost savings. Okay. And any questions regarding the finance case study? I know everybody looks tired after lunch, but I'm sorry? The y-axis is the ratio. We weren't allowed to publish the actual numbers, but we could publish a ratio, which is what we were looking for as a comparison. So in this case, I think the most important one was ratio of defects, which is, are you finding at least all the defects found by business as usual? And by the way, here we're comparing unique defects. So we're comparing the same defect. It's not like you found 10 here and 10 separate here. It's 10 and the same 10, or 10, the same 10 plus 2, that type of scenario. We're comparing apples to apples, not differently. Any more questions? Yeah, go ahead.
My question is regarding the effective estimations. If we are using the OATS technique, like we are doing 2 types of estimation, OM estimates and lockdown estimates. When we are doing the OM estimates, at that time, we are not aware of that, yes, we can use OATS, and we just do a rough estimate, and on the basis of that, we hire the resources, right?
Yeah.
And but at the time of LDE, yes, we apply OATS, and then definitely we can do that task with lesser number of resources.
Yeah.
But we already have the resources on board, so what we can do with those resources?
There's something really interesting you can do. That's a great question, and maybe for that I will open up. I'll go back to this generating orthogonal arrays, and I can show you exactly what you can do. And this can be done automated through a tool, but it's a fantastic question. Let's say, for example, and let's take a simple example. You had three parameters, 2 levels each. Okay, that was your test scope. Okay.
No, but my question is, at the time of OM estimates, we are even not sure of what kind of
Sure, I understand. I understand. I'll get to your question. I understand your question. I'll just show you. So let's say your real test scope could be tested in 4 test cases based on an orthogonal array. But early on, you budgeted 8 test cases. So you've kept enough staff, equipment, everything else for 8 test cases. You can move up to the higher orthogonal array. And if you do, you'll get better coverage. You'll get more test cases within that space. So you can always move to a next higher orthogonal array that fits your problem. So you get more dense test points. They'll still be orthogonal. And now you can, and actually this is one of the challenge you're bringing up is one of the biggest challenges for contractors. Let's say you're working in an outsourced environment, or you're working in an environment where you're working with like government, and you get a fixed price, or you get paid by time and material, let's say. So let's say you have budget, the company's budgeted you for 100 staff a year. But based on efficiency gains, you only really need 70 staff a year. So hey, that's not always a win-win scenario for that company. I mean, maybe they can renegotiate, get higher rates, but here what you can do is you can say improve your risk reduction and still keep your staffing effort by selecting larger orthogonal arrays within that test space. Do you get my point?
Yeah, I got that, but is there any way that if you can do some effective OM estimates, and at that time?
No, I think of course you can. If someone gives you factor tables ahead of time. Then you can in minutes tell them, okay, this is how many test cases it's going to take. It takes me X staff to run this. It takes me X days to run each of these test cases. I need this equipment. You can do it very quickly. The challenge is if someone just gives you a big requirements document like that browser test, and the 40 test case limit was an arbitrary limit. Some guy just said, maybe I have enough money for 40 or I have enough time for 40. But if you'd given him factor table and get an OA, they'll immediately say, okay, you just need budget for 27 test cases. So it's from a project management standpoint, if you can get people in the practice of giving you factor tables, you can very easily estimate testing effort. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay, good. Now this is I'd say it's an interesting case study. This is from ITT Industries for their MRP system. Now MRP system is used to plan manufacturing resources so that they have the right input goods when they're manufacturing their goods. And it's a very complex software that interfaces with their suppliers. They know what their suppliers, what their inventory is. They put in their orders. They get scheduling dates. And then the products are received. They check in those. They check in those products. It's an involved process, and it's a critical process. And the manager for this had decided that they wanted 100% code coverage every release, before any release, because it's a critical system. They want 100% code coverage. Now, how many here get a requirement like 100% code coverage? Anyone? No? Okay. A lot of teams I work with, their management will give them requirements saying, all software must be 100% code coverage. But very rarely do they get there. It's an extremely challenging task. I mean, hey, that's our dream goal. I'm not saying it's something we don't want to achieve. That would be wonderful from a software perspective. But it's very hard to do. How to determine the right test cases to get there affordably. And this is an example of how you can use orthogonal arrays to systematically get 100% code coverage. So this kind of went through it. It's challenging to get to 100% code coverage. Organizations rarely do, but a lot of them do include it as a requirement. And orthogonal arrays provide a process. So in this MRP system, the system had been stamped, actually fully tested by an auditing firm. This was one of the big 5 American auditing firms, had gone through, inspected the code, and said, hey, this is good to go. But the team said, this is such a critical system. If our MRP goes down, we can't deliver our products to our customers, we lose money. So they said, let's get 100% code coverage. That was their objective. And they wanted to minimize testing effort since they'd already gone through the cost of paying this auditing firm to do this analysis. So, and the scope of this was around the scheduling requirements. They saw a lot of risk there, which was, the dates for when product orders were placed, the dates for shipments, the order dates, the bid dates. There was bidding done by customers. Anything related to scheduling was considered a high-risk area. So those were the areas that were going to be tested. And here were some of the date-related functions. They wanted to validate date at time of entry of an order, compare two dates. If they were getting multiple bids at a time, they wanted to make sure that they gave priority to the earlier bid versus the later bid. So there were several different factors that were needed to be evaluated. And in particular, for this example, I'm going to show you the request for a quote. This was done across the whole MRP system, but for this example, they used it for the request for quote system, which was a bidding system where the suppliers would bid the quantities, their inventory, and the schedules of delivery dates, and they would make decisions on what they wanted to order. So there were 7 key user-entered dates in this system at different types and at different times of the actual system. And here's the factor table. So they had a particular job date, they had a date requested, and by the way, this includes illegal scenarios as well, blanks. So they wanted to make sure they capture illegal scenarios as well. Start date, end date. So they went through this. They went through the process of generating a factor table. They had a huge requirements document. We worked with them for I'd say weeks to get down to this document. They'd never had anything this concise. And in developing the factor table, they found 2 errors in the logic, just by thinking about the problem in terms of factors and levels. They said, there's 2 defects that we found. So immediately, even though it was stamped cleared, the process of generating that factor table has tremendous value for engineering thought process. By the way, this came out to 32 test cases using an L32 orthogonal array. This is just an example of some of the tests. And when they executed this, they also ran in parallel a code coverage tool that would analyze, okay, what percentage of lines of codes are being executed. And total combinations was over 1 million. They ran 32 test cases. And they monitored the code coverage. And what they found was, in 32 test cases, they got to 88% code coverage. They were blown away. They'd never gotten past 70. And that was after running hundreds of test cases. Because orthogonal arrays, if you notice, every test case, things are changing. Many, many things are changing in the test case. So you're exercising several different points of logic. But if you notice, they got to 88%. They didn't get to 100%. So what's missing? So they went through the code and they looked at what was missing. And it was related to anomalies, such as if somebody enters a month number 13, or someone enters a day 32 in a month, or 33 in a month, or a day 0 in a month, or a negative day in a month. So very illegal type entries. So what does that mean? Hey, the factor table is not complete. So they went back, updated their factor table with those parameters. It added a few test cases. They got to 100% code coverage. In just a handful of cases. So this is a way you can systematically get there. Take your best guess on the factor table. Obviously use your best judgment. Run it. If you're and you have to run it in parallel with, of course, some kind of code coverage tool. Inspect the code that's left out. Add that back to the factor table. And using the iterative process in just 2 cycles. The first cycle they got to 32%. 32 test cases. Next one I think was 35 test cases. They got to 100% code coverage, 2 cycles. It was a complete breakthrough for that team. This is just another example. Just wanted to show. And one other thing they learned was, I told you they found some defects just in developing the factor table. So as a practice, and this is something I recommended earlier, is they decided from that point onwards, factor table was going to be the first page of any technical design document. And that should be updated. Whenever there's changes to a technical design, update your factor table. It's just like a summary on the front of your page. Of course, you're going to have details later on explaining each of the functions, and they started doing this, and that's great. And I think it's time for a quick break. Any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Why do you have a tool for the performance array selection details? Do you have a tool for converting a design or document into a factor table?
We actually do. It's a separate tool. I mean, you can do it manually just by reading a document. So we have a tool that can help do it faster, but
Hundreds of pages, that also takes an effort.
absolutely, it's work. You know, I'll tell you from a practical perspective, the fastest way to pull out a factor table from, especially if it's a legacy system, like you've already run tests on it before, look at the prior test plan. Someone's already done the work, some of the work. I mean, they may not have done a good job, but they've done a good enough job. You can get at least a start to what are the factors and levels they chose for testing the system in a prior release. Let's say you have a version 1, version 2. So that's your starting point. Now you can go search the document and see, okay, am I missing anything? That's a good starting point. We do have a tool that can help automate that process, but I think it can be done manually as well. So either way, yeah.
So once your factor table is ready, now instead of writing the 1,000 pages of tedious document, you need to give the comments and everything in the tool itself, and it generates the complete document for you. Yes.
Yeah.
Correct. Yes, it also possible. It allows, the tool allows you.
Yeah. And I think one thing to note, by the way, there's two scenarios. Sometimes you never get to 100% code coverage. And there's a few reasons for that. One is you don't know all the requirements. Like you haven't documented them well, just like you said. Maybe you haven't documented them well, so you have to go research the code to see, okay, what requirements have I missed based on what code was not executed. There was one case when we got to about 96% coverage with one customer, and they just couldn't find out what that remaining code was. What they finally found out, it was some branch that was disregarded. So it was useless code, which they would have never hit. So there's two types of scenarios. One is where you don't have enough understanding of the requirements, in which case you need to update your factor table and update your understanding. The second is you may have some useless code that never is going to be exercised anyway. Or that is so obscurely exercised that you need to update your factor table so you trigger that combination. So you can use this as a very good iterative process to get to the end goal. But it's a systematic process as opposed to saying, okay, let me add one more test case, let me add one more, let's add this, let's add that. You end up with an extremely long test plan and maybe 70, 80% code coverage. Yeah.
And in practically, we implemented this reverse engineering technique, and we convert the complete the TDS into the factor table. It works very well. Yeah. Only the person need to have the domain knowledge of the TDS. What are the complete the functionality we have in document, right? The person has to have the idea about the document. If you know what is written in the document, it is easy to convert. Depends upon the number of pages and number of things are there in it. But comparatively, if you want to convert into the any of the things, it is 10 times much quicker than anything else.
I think from an effort perspective, that's a great question. I think a starting point, if you have a prior test plan, it's a great way to reduce your effort because someone's done part of that work for you already because they determined what was important to test. You can easily extract from, not a requirements document, take a test plan. You can easily extract from a test plan what their factors and levels are because you know exactly what test points they chose because they had to have specified them or they're assumed in the test plan somewhere. So you can grab them out. So that gives you a good head start to reduce your effort. If you're starting with a pure 500-page document, it's going to take you some time. But you know what? It's going to take you time regardless. If you wanted to write test cases for that document, it's going to take you have to understand the system. Otherwise, what you end up doing is, for requirements page 1, you write one test case. Requirements page 2, you write another test case. You forget that requirements page 1 item may interoperate with requirements page 2, may interoperate with requirements page 3. Once you summarize in factor table, OA takes care of the interoperability.
Yeah. So if you look at when you do the reverse engineering, whichever page, whichever word you select, it actually keeps track of it. What is it from which page? Suppose I have 400 pages of the TDS. Out of 400, I selected one thing from the page 16, one from page 18, one from page 200. it keeps track of the complete page numbers also with the factor table. So this factor at this level, from which page I selected, it keeps a track of it also. So further, we need not to again look back where it is. We can easily refer back and we can check it.
The first I'm going to go through is the business as usual process. The next is pairwise testing, where you look at testing all two-factor combinations. Then there's n-way testing. N-way testing means testing all three-factor combinations, all four-factor, five-factor, six-factor. There's some people that do every 10-way. I've seen the whole gamut. And the final is versus classical design of experiments, which I think somebody else asked earlier. So the first is business as usual. And I'm kind of just listing a few simple pros and cons. Business as usual process is usually when you have gurus internally within your organization. And it can be very effective. If you have somebody who's been involved in a project from very early on, who has in-depth knowledge of the interfaces, of the system, of the functionality, they can do a great job planning test cases. They can find all the defects. The challenge is, hey, these are very rare commodities. How many gurus do you have in your organization that stay around, that have availability of time, and that know systems end to end? The complexity of systems today means there's generally not one person responsible for all the technical aspects. So the con is, hey, there's not that many gurus available. If they're available, if the system is simple enough, they can do a fantastic job. But in a lot of cases today, this is not a reality. The next comparison, and this is the one that's, by the way, most commonly confused with OA, is called pairwise. Pairwise testing is not a balanced testing. It just deals with cover all two combinations. So that WFDS problem I showed earlier, that weapons firing system, I had a temperature, number of weapons, weapons type, and mounting method. So it'll make sure all combinations of temperature and number of weapons is tested. All combinations of temperature and weapons type. All combinations of temperature and mounting method. But it doesn't require it to be in a balanced fashion. Now, what's the drawback of that? Drawback is, you remember in the EW system case, the electronic warfare system case, how easy was it to detect what the root cause of defects was? You lose that capability. And I'll walk through some other issues that happen. But there is a pro. Because you don't require balancing, sometimes it's smaller. Sometimes you can get a smaller test case than an OA. So there's an advantage and a disadvantage. So from a budgeting standpoint, what we found, we actually ran comparisons with pairwise. You can reduce, sometimes the test cases are the same size, sometimes they're smaller. Let's say there's an average of 2 to 5% reduction in test cases if you look across the board. Sometimes more, sometimes none. What's more expensive labor? The test execution labor or the defect analysis labor? Defect analysis labor, that's your experts. That's your systems engineers. The ones who are going to say, okay, this test case failed because of this and here are the implications of it. Your test execution labor is the low-cost labor. So you save pennies and you spend pounds. And that's what these financial services firms found. They said, I can save a few test cases here and there, but then I have to pay much more in defect analysis. So from a cost budgeting standpoint, there's a difference. Also, when you try to find root causes of failure, or you do performance analysis, such as mean and variance analysis of the data, you can come to incorrect conclusions, and I'll walk through that. N-way testing. N-way testing means, say, cover all three-factor combinations, or cover all four-factor combinations. For that WFDS example I showed you earlier, all four-factor combinations mean you run all 81 possibilities. So you run all combinations. So by definition, you run more tests, or you run more possibilities, you have better coverage. So that's a pro. You get better coverage. But what's the con? It costs so much more money. It becomes unaffordable. When you compare the even three-way testing to the original test cases, if you go back to the financial services case studies, if you compare how much three-way would have cost, it would have been almost double the business as usual. So companies are not ready to transition over to something that costs more. They're looking right now to cut cost, cut schedule. So that's one of the big barriers here. In addition, just like pairwise, you don't get debugging capability because these are not balanced test cases. Orthogonal arrays are resolution 3 designs, which means, as I walk through the properties, you get balancing, equal number of parameters in each column, equal number of levels in each column. All combinations occur equal number of times. That balancing allows you to get debugging. You don't get that with three-way. And the last one is classical design of experiments. And I think classical design of experiments is really geared towards statistical modeling. And its primary objective is to determine where to set your design parameters based on all the variability that can go on in operation. So it's not as appropriate for this stage of the game where you're dealing with a system that's already created. Additionally, how many people here have studied classical design of experiments? Raise your hand. Nobody? Okay, one. Okay, let me ask you a question. How easy is it to learn? Very difficult. Yeah. So how easy would it be to implement across a broader organization? Yeah, very, very difficult. Very difficult. The reality is we have thousands of testers, and they'd have to go through several semesters of training in order to get proficient enough to use these methods effectively. You can, of course, have one or two gurus, but how much time do they have to support thousands of testers? They can maybe support a few groups. Additionally, there's some other issues with mixed-level designs and software testing, but I don't think we need to go into that. And I think there's something else I wanted to show, going into more detail of comparisons between using an orthogonal test plan and using pairwise. So let's take the browser test example. The original browser test example had 8 parameters and 3,888 total possibilities. Using a pairwise test plan, you get 27 test cases. And what's the reason? The product of the two largest levels, that's going to tell you the minimum pairwise. You had one 9 level and you had a few 3 levels. 9 times 3 is 27. The bare minimum is 27. You can't go any lower than that and achieve pairwise. If you run an orthogonal array, you also get 27 test cases. So here's my question to you. Hey, both OA and pairwise generate same number of test cases. What's the difference? Is there a difference? The difference is, and you can see it in a color-coded fashion. I color-coded each level. But I think it's more telling if you sort on a particular parameter. So in this case, on the OA test plan, I sorted on display resolution in Java plugin. You notice that there's 3 no cases for every single of the resolutions. It's balanced, proportionally balanced. Let's go to the pairwise test plan. The first time you get 4, next time you get 2, next time you get 3. There's no balance. So what does that imply? If we get some defects in this system, it's not proportionally balanced. You won't be able to find the root causes as easily as you do with an orthogonal array. And let's take a possibility. Let's say, for example, there was a defect when the browser type is Safari and display resolution is 1280 by 1024. Let's just say there was a defect there. If you looked at all possible combinations that based on this defect, out of all combinations, how many tests would fail? 432. So if you ran all 3,888, knowing that this is the failure, and let's say this is the only failure, you'll get 432 defective cases. And if you look at proportion, that's about average failure rate of 11.1%. Okay, and this is, let's say you had budget to run all these test cases, you determine, okay, this is the failure. So this is, hey, the unbiased estimate of the total universe in this case. Let's look at an orthogonal array. If that same test case failed, out of 27 tests, 3 tests failed, 11.1% failure rate. All combinations, 3,888, 432, 11.1% failure rate. So if you look at even mean estimates, very basic mean estimates, you come very close to the total global mean using an orthogonal array. So if you're doing performance assessments, you get there very quickly. While with pairwise, hey, sometimes by luck, you'll get to 11.1%. It can happen. Sometimes you'll get below, sometimes you'll get higher. The thing is, it's unpredictable. So it's very hard to make decisions based on this. And I'll tell you, if you hand a pairwise test plan to a statistician, they'll spend days trying to figure out how to figure out a mean and a variance because of the unbalance of it. So in addition to, so here, analysis of pairwise can lead to incorrect conclusions. And in a lot of cases, what we found is when people do mean estimates, they'll come to a failure rate that's below their threshold, so they'll accept the system, although in reality it's much higher than that. So it's just a simple example. Any questions on comparison of methods? No? Does it, how about in this group? Has anyone in anyone's organization used pairwise testing? Has anyone's organization used orthogonal array testing? No? One. Okay. And how about classical design of experiments? Do anyone's organizations use that in the development stage? No? Okay. Just one. Okay. That's good to know. Traceability, okay. So you use traceability. So you say, okay, but where's the traceability? Let's say they wrote your requirements. This is the requirement. I want to be able to display 3 templates, 3 template web page types. I want my customers to be able to use several different operating systems, including Windows XP, Windows NT, etc. Okay, they give you. I want them to have option to have or not have Shockwave. Let's say they give you requirements. How do you test those requirements? Let's go back to. Any ideas? That's a challenge everybody faces. Someone hands you a requirements document and says, are these requirements good? Are they complete? Are they going to yield a good system? Let me go back to. So let's say someone wrote out the requirements that implied this factor table for a browser test. How do you do it today? Do you just say, okay, the guy put nice indentations for every sub requirement, he put a nice label for every requirement, he capitalized things properly, he spelled things properly. What's the review process? Anybody? Expert review, that's good. But how does an expert review? Best practices, good. Yeah, past history. So what the expert is doing in his head is he's creating scenarios. And he's running through them in his head and saying, do these requirements qualify with these scenarios? And he has in his head maybe hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of scenarios, which he uses to inspect the document. So that's how they do it. They use mental thought process and they go through and do it. Now here's the question. You guys are all experts. How easy is it to come up with scenarios to challenge a set of requirements, especially when you're dealing with, let's say, 50 requirements or 100 requirements? It's hard. It's a lot of work. I mean, our brains don't work that way. You can use an orthogonal array to generate the thought scenarios. And that's something really important from a project management standpoint. Even before the system is developed, at the requirement stage, when requirements are on paper, you can already make effective scenarios to validate the requirements. So you make thought experiments, we call them. And the way we recommend doing it is just the same way you said, expert reviews. You work with the experts, they come up with a factor table based on the requirements, generate a set of scenarios, and then talk through them. Say, let's say if I had client X, will they be able to view the page based on my knowledge? Of course, the system is not built yet. Will they be able to view it? If I had client Y, will they be able to view it? If I had client Z, would they be able to view it? But now you're creating a diverse set of clients to validate these requirements. Not only that, let's say, for example, client X, client Y, and 2 other clients fail. You can use the defect analysis to determine, okay, what requirement is driving this potential failure. So you can very early on find out which are your risky requirements and fix them. Right? I think one of the hardest things I found, I was working as my first job out of college, I worked as an investment banker. It was probably one of the worst jobs I ever had. But I worked maybe 70, 80 hours a week. And one of the things they would make me do, and this is why it was the worst job, is I had to evaluate people's Excel models for stock pricing. Okay, so the way the finance industry works is people build these really complex 50 sheets, Excel sheets, pricing models where they input data. Okay, what is the interest rate today? What is interest rate in India? What's interest rate in the US? What's this stock price? What's this stock price? And they come up with some number. And if the number is higher than some target number, they buy the stock. If it's lower, they don't buy the stock, something like that. So I had to go and do due diligence as a junior investment banker. My job was to go through someone else's created project and decide, okay, does this work or not? Now, anyone that's looked through an Excel spreadsheet or even a software that someone else developed, it's really hard to search through. Even if you say, okay, trace back to, okay, where's the origin of this formula? Where's the origin of this formula? It takes you forever. So I would look at their requirements document. And early on, and I wasn't using orthogonal arrays at the time, but I was saying, okay, what scenarios? Let me run through scenarios. Let's say this interest rate changes. Let's say this interest rate changes. Let's say this stock price moves, this commodity price moves. What would happen? And using that, now I said, okay, logically is that number increasing or decreasing? Does it make sense? And then I would go and execute it. But the thing was, I was creating basically thought experiments. I was going through the requirements document and inspecting it using scenarios. I wish I had thought of this process earlier on. Say, okay, I can think of a diverse set of scenarios because there was hundreds of inputs in the system. Think of a set of inputs that I can use to inspect this person's design. So think about it from a project management standpoint. Orthogonal arrays and testing can be implemented very early on because if your requirements are poor or you have failures that could be driven by requirements, you don't want to find that out all the way after the system's developed. You want to find it out early on, and there's ways you can do it, and you can make it systematic. Okay. I think this pretty much wraps it up. Just want to say very quickly, thank you very much, and I think there's a huge opportunity to reduce testing cost, testing schedule using orthogonal arrays. I encourage everyone to try it out on their own, on one of their projects. Pick something small of reasonable size that you can run, and make a comparison to how you're doing it today. And look at how much time it takes, so what the testing effort is, what the cost is, and what defects you find. And spend a majority of your time, instead of in selecting the scenario, spend a majority of time reviewing this factor table. You get your factor table right, the rest is easy. Okay. And if you're interested in using the tool, everyone has a free license to use it for 30 days. So if you're just playing around with it, you can go ahead and do that and download it. And I think the PMI email sent out a download link. But if someone has problems downloading it, I can send them CDs as well. That's good. I think with that, well, thank you very much. And if there's any questions, be happy to answer.
Thank you so much, Kedar.
Oh, sure.
May I invite Shri Hiramat, our executive committee member, to do the honors. On behalf of all of us, a memento to Kedar Phadke. Let the applause keep going.